This
button.
conference will now be recorded.
Welcome to Live Talk with Dr. Beatrice Hill. Dr. Beatrice Hill is a registered nurse with a PhD in Health Services Administration and has worked over 50 years in the medical field, and now is the CEO for Smith Genetic Research. Her esteemed guest this week is Dr. Douglas Randall Smith. He is a graduate of Emory University with a BA in chemistry, Wake Forest School of Medicine. He worked as an ER physician until the late 1990s and met someone who permanently changed the direction in the field of medicine. And now here is Dr. Beatrice Hill.
Hi there, how are you? Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. We have, as Chrissy had said, we have Dr. Smith with us, and there he is. And Dr. Smith, after listening to that, tell me, who did you meet that changed your course out of the emergency room?
Good afternoon, Bea. How are you today?
I'm wonderful.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. I hope that our listeners over time find that having you and I available on a daily basis, Monday through Thursday, 12:30 to by the way, what are you going to be? 12:30 to 1:15?
12:30 to 1.
12:30 to 1. I hope that your listeners every day find that to be a resource for any types of questions they may have about either the DNA test, the genetics test, or the class action lawsuit.
And we are recording these, just so that you know, Dr. Smith, we are recording these, so they will be available also.
I will behave and I will watch my language.
So tell us how you went from the emergency room into this passion with the opioids.
Long story short, it was not a pathway I had any interest in going down. I met a gentleman by the name of General Alexander Haig, who had been highly involved in the Vietnam War and had been chief of staff for Ronald Reagan. And we were introduced through a third party, a gentleman by the name of John Brogan. And there were a number of reasons why Mr. Brogan thought that General Haig would be interested in spending some time and discussing things with me. The general had a belief that the Chinese had pumped large amounts of very cheap heroin into Southeast Asia, and that this had a huge negative impact on our soldiers during the Vietnam War. And Haig was convinced this was one of the reasons that the war went so poorly for the United States. And he was greatly concerned, distressed, that since the Chinese had found so much success infiltrating and undermining the U.S. soldier, that it was just a matter of time before the Chinese aimed towards the mainland with an attempt to undermine the U.S. worker. This was back in the 90s. There was no hint of an opioid crisis, but the general had me worked with me and had me promise that I would be prepared and ready when the Chinese came. It turns out the general was brilliant in his analysis and spot on in his predictions. It unfolded really the way he had laid it out, that it would start out with an infiltration of the regulatory agencies, an infiltration of the pharmaceutical industry, and ultimately would be just direct import smuggling by the Chinese. He didn't mention the Mexicans at the time, but that was the only difference. Other than that, he was spot on. So I had no interest in working with the opioids. My background was emergency medicine. I was happy in my career, but he was so concerned about this that I fell in line with his thinking, and we actually ended up opening up a clinic specifically for the use of opioids, and specifically as an incubator for ways and strategies that we could try to make the opioids safer. And then it's just a straight shot to where we are here today, with an understanding that there is no way to make the opioids safer. We had started out with that belief, Dr. B. We had started out with the belief that the opioids could be made safer. in retrospect, that was practically childish in its wishful intent. There is no way the opioids can be safer. I think we saw very clearly with the Jose Vladimir Sandoval Sierra study in June of 2020 that the opioids are not only poisonous and not only causing the methylation, the damage to the DNA, but the damage itself can be measured after just a few doses. So the idea that there is a safe use of the opioids is wishful thinking. Now, Dr. B, that doesn't mean that the opioids are not going to be used. Okay, quite frankly, particularly for end-of-life situations, there's nothing better. There is no substitute and nothing on the horizon. We do not want people to suffer at end of life because of this. But it would be appropriate for, number one, the opioids to have a black box warning by the FDA. And number two, for anyone who is prescribed the opioids to have the opportunity of informed consent. B, if I'm not mistaken, you've got a listener that's listening to us today. We don't use names, but I'm both impressed and honored that these individuals are tracking us down and joining us. And I want to ask this individual if he's able to type in responses. I want to ask this individual what year did he begin taking the opioids? In other words, what year was he prescribed the opioids? That's the first question. The second question is, did anybody ever warn him that the opioids might cause genetic damage? And then the third question would be, if he had been warned about genetic damage, would he have continued to take the opioids in the manner in which he did take them? So
I will tell you that, yeah, and we have some of your slides here today if you would like to show any. So please feel free that you can show a slide if you'd like.
I love looking at our data. I'll look at our data any point in time. I'll pull my phone out at a stoplight and look at the data. I love looking at our data. If the choice was up to me, I always like to start with the first DNA slide that we have, the first graphic.
Well, how about the beginning with the catecholamines, where you first saw the big damage?
This one right here. This is my favorite slide to stare at.
Okay.
And I do stare at this slide. This is from our clinical trial. I wrote this clinical trial. It was this data that I was after. This data has never been accumulated before. This data has never been looked at before. This data just simply doesn't exist. And what we've done here for the first time ever, we're looking at the DNA of the opioid naive, and we're comparing it to the DNA of the opioid dependent. In other words, the opioid naive are people who've really never taken opioids, and the opioid dependent are defined by people who they've taken the opioids long enough that when they attempt to stop taking the opioids, they get sick. And what we did that no one else had ever done was we compared this data to the blood draw of the people who volunteered to go into withdrawal. Before we go to the blood draw, looking at this slide right here, we did our best to color code it to make it understandable as possible for the viewer. And what the viewer can see is that the top five, the ones that are the green ones, those are the opioid naive. Those are the people who've never taken opioids before. And then from number 6 all the way on down to the bottom, those are the opioid dependent. Now, the obvious thing here is that, hey, those two things don't look the same. The top does not look the same as the bottom. If the top and the bottom look the same, the whole thing would be green. It's not. Yellow, orange, other colors come in as the percentage of methylation. That's what we're measuring here, is the percentage of methylation increases in the opioid dependent. But now, wait a minute. Everybody's been told, including us, everybody's been told that opioid addiction, opioid use disorder, it's just a brain disease. Well, wait a minute. If it's just a brain disease, well, then by definition, by the very definition of mental health, there can't be methylation in the DNA like this. Okay, methylation is not a brain disease. Methylation is a poisoning. Methylation is a poisoning specifically in the DNA. So if this is a brain disease, no, no, no. This slide right here is the first slide of several that make the mental health diagnosis of opioid addiction, opioid use disorder, an impossibility. And in fact, B, if we can, let's move up to the second slide, B, unless you or someone else has any questions on this slide. But the second slide, this one, I adore this slide. This is what we wondered about for a very, very, very long time. This is what we wondered about, and this was the answer that we were looking for. What we were wondering about was, are we going to be able to build a test that can actually show the damage in the DNA and exactly where that damage is occurring? And so this is a highly, highly complex and scientific slide, but I think it's fairly straightforward and simple to pull away some basic information from this slide. Now, what you're looking at here is how genetic people talk to each other. This is how one genetic expert, one geneticist, one DNA expert talks to another DNA expert. That all that stuff you see on the top, that's how a genetic person looks at and talks about a gene. So you're looking at one specific gene. That one specific gene has one specific function. Now, this particular gene is what's known as the OPRM1, OP, opioid, R, receptor, M, mu, 1. OPRM1, opioid mu receptor 1. Okay, that is the main opioid receptor in the body. It is hundreds of millions of years old. You can find it all throughout life on this planet. This is a very old and ancient and fundamental component of life itself. And then what you see there at the bottom, you see the little blue columns and the little red columns. Okay, everywhere where the red column is bigger than the blue column, okay, that red column is excessive methylation. The blue column is normal methylation. There is an amount of methylation that you're born with, and it is considered normal. Okay, it's when that poisoning, that methylation goes above normal that you begin to get in trouble. And as you can see, the methylation, the poisoning is all up and down this gene. It's all over the place. Okay, and every one of those little red and blue columns is an area of poisoning, is an area of damage. What type damage? Simple. The specific type of damage that poisoning does. You're looking at it right there. Everywhere where the red column is bigger than the blue column, a piece of your DNA was turned off permanently. Now, I know we got some listeners in the audience, and I'm speaking directly to you now. Look at that screen in front of you. You're looking at what changed your life. You are not a drug addict. You are not an opioid addict. You never were. Okay, everywhere where you see that the red is bigger than the blue, that piece of the DNA got turned off. Now, there's two types of switches in the DNA. Okay, there's light switches and there's circuit breakers. Okay, you turn off a light switch, the room gets dark. You turn off a circuit breaker, part of the house gets dark. Okay, so the extent of the damage depends on the exact location of where the damage is. Okay, and we're going to talk about this in some detail, but let me state that again. Okay, the type damage that methylation causes, it turns off that piece of DNA that's under the damage. It's called gene silencing. Okay, that part of the DNA is permanently turned off, and that is what has happened to our people. And for those listeners in the audience, you are now hearing what exactly happened to your body and what changed your life in such dramatic ways. Okay, part of your DNA got turned off. It was turned off without your knowledge, your permission, or your consent. And this, as far as the science we know currently, it's been turned off permanently. Obviously, there's hope that something can be done, but I don't want to give false hope. Right now, it's just best to consider that they are permanently turned off. If the area that's turned off is just randomly throughout the gene, that's really more like a light switch. But if you look up above there, you'll see kind of a little salmon colored, reddish orange colored bar. And if you look really closely in the middle of that bar, it says promoter. So if the listener even needs to, if you're watching on the recording, if you need to turn turn the video off, enlarge your screen, and you'll see that little red-orange bar. It says promoter. The promoter region of the gene is the area of the gene that is the circuit breaker. Okay, so that is the circuit breaker. And as you can see directly beneath that reddish orange bar, directly beneath the promoter region, in the promoter region itself, you see several areas that have been turned off. This means that the poisoning was in a highly sensitive area called the promoter region. It's the equivalent of going to the fuse box in your house, or the breaker box in your house. I think when I was saying fuse box, I show my age there. You're going to the breaker box in your house and just randomly throwing some switches off. Okay, if you go to the circuit breaker in your house and randomly turn off some switches, is your house going to be normal? No, it's not going to be normal at all. Okay, how abnormal it is depends on what you turned off. If you turned off your refrigerator and freezer, okay, you're going to be in surprise in about 3 days. If you turned off your oven, you're not going to be able to cook. Turn off your washer dryer, you're not going to be able to clean. If you turned off the lights throughout the house, you're going to stumble around in the dark. Okay, and that's exactly what has happened to our people. Some very important areas in the promoter region of the OPRM1 gene have been turned off. How do we know? You're looking at it on the screen right there. You see that area, that reddish orange bar that says promoter region. If you just drop down straight beneath it, those area of the gene are in the promoter region, and those are the areas where we think the most damage has been done. B, any questions or comments or anything there?
Chrissy gets the comments. Okay, no, she said.
No.
Okay. So we've seen the DNA damage. We've seen where in the gene the DNA damage is. Okay, let's just jump ahead to the slide. And this is our theory of why this damage is so devastating. Okay, we've seen that the opioids cause the methylation, they cause the DNA damage. DNA damage is called gene silencing. It turns off areas of the gene. We believe, therefore, that an abnormal opioid receptor is being made. How could it not be? If you're looking at that level of damage, how can that gene function normally? That gene would normally produce an opioid receptor. It's what that gene does, makes opioid receptors. You put damage all up and down that gene, you're not going to make it a normal opioid receptor. Okay, so if we can jump ahead to the next graphic. This is where we believe, and where we think common sense is telling us, that the damage from the DNA is doing its harm. Okay, this is again, we recognize these are high level complex slides. We recognize the last slide that we looked at is how geneticists talk to each other. Okay, now we're looking at how physicians and providers talk to each other. Okay, this is high level stuff. Okay, but we feel that it's important to present the actual truth so that the listener can begin to have and develop an understanding of what has happened to them. You see here, this is something called the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system. Okay, this is the part of your nervous system that controls your organs and organ functions. And as you can see from this slide, it's divided into two parts. One's called the parasympathetic part, the other's called the sympathetic part. Now, the layperson would know the sympathetic nervous system as the fight or flight. You've all felt it. Kid runs out in front of your car and you slam on brakes. Okay, that triggers the fight or flight response, and you all know what that feels like. The viewer may not be as familiar with the rest and digest, that sleep, eat, digest, and I encourage the listener to take some time to turn off the video, look at the organ systems that are involved, and then think about what you felt while you were in withdrawal. Okay, now the psychiatrists and the mental health experts and the addiction experts, well, they're all going to tell you, oh, well, opioid withdrawal is uncomfortable, it's not dangerous, it won't kill you. Okay, that's not true. Don't believe that. There's a lot of things that they have told you that you're going to have to just erase from your head. I am without an explanation for why my colleagues have abandoned the ways of science and abandoned the ways of medicine, and frankly told people things that just aren't true. Okay, and if somebody has told you that you're an opioid addict, that person was wrong. You are not an opioid addict. If someone has told you that you have opioid addiction, they are wrong. If someone has told you that opioid withdrawal is just you craving to get high on an opioid, they're wrong. If someone has told you that opioid addiction is uncomfortable but it's not dangerous, they are wrong. Anytime you start messing around with people's organ systems, that's going to be dangerous. Now, let me just, we only have a few minutes left here. Okay, and I want to turn everything back over to Dr. B here for the last few minutes. But let's make this very clear. Let's say that again. You start messing around with people's organ systems, you're not going to have a good outcome. Okay, Mother Nature has spent, what, 500, 550, 600 million years working on the system that you're looking at on the screen right there. And we as human beings are so arrogant that we think we can go in helter-skelter and randomly start turning off pieces of the DNA and everything's going to work just fine. And then when we do start turning off pieces of the DNA and things start breaking, we blame the individual, tell them they're an opioid addict, and that this is all in their head. Future generations are not going to judge us well, and I hope the future generations understand that, frankly, according to what our people are telling us, they feel like the experts. They feel like the experts abused their trust. They trusted the experts. The experts told them things. These things weren't true, but the experts remained the experts and actually made money. So there's a trust issue here. I'm not going to throw my colleagues in psychiatry and mental health under the bus because, frankly, they've already thrown themselves under the bus. But look at this slide here. Look at this autonomic nervous system and think back on the symptoms that you had during opioid withdrawal. Okay, the sweating, well, you see the sweat glands here. Okay, the watery eyes, well, you see the eyes here. Okay, the runny nose, well, you see that here. Okay, the abdominal cramps, well, you see that here. What you may not have known is that in addition to losing control of your sweat glands, which is uncomfortable, in addition to losing control of your bowels, which is distressing, you also lost control of your adrenal glands. And that adrenal gland has enough adrenaline in it to kill you. So, Dr. B, if you want, we can stop here for today. And tomorrow we can pick up here and go more in depth into the adrenal gland, what loss of the adrenal gland looks like, how a loss of the adrenal gland can kill you. And we could just keep going from there. But I hesitate to go too much further into the science today. And I thought maybe we should take our last few minutes and wrap up, and let's see if there's anything we need to go over again or cover again, or anything you feel we need to, any questions we need to answer.
Well, I have to say, I really liked the explanation of the circuit breakers and the light switches. Really made it very clear that all those areas had been turned off.
By the way,
did
you notice my lights just went off here? And they just came back.
Yes, I noticed.
Yeah. I must be messing with the DNA of the library here. Or
yes, I think you might.
Somebody's listening to our broadcast and is trying to be funny.
Yes, I think so. That's really wild. If anybody has any questions, please type them in, and we'll be happy to have Dr. Smith to go ahead and answer those questions for you. But I have to say, this was really pretty clear on what you were saying. That promoter region, that was very interesting, that was that big section there that had been turned off. And that's why we have so many people that are suffering when they try to stop the opioids. Is that correct?
It is. B, remember years back there was a commercial about it was actually for margarine, and it's not nice to fool Mother Nature.
Mother Nature.
That's really the point here. We should not be turning off pieces of the DNA helter-skelter, which raises the question, and we will go into this in future broadcasts. Why didn't the FDA pick up on this? That's a very interesting question.
That is a very interesting question. And I would assume that since all other avenues to go ahead and bring light to this have failed because of big money, the only way to attack this is to go ahead, take the Smith test, prove that you're not have a mental diagnosis, that your DNA has been changed, and take it to the court system where it will get out among the media and into the places that they need to get in, and then people will start to understand. I cannot stand it when people are called a drug addict. They labeled them, and that is 1,000% wrong. A drug addict. Is that to cover up what they did? They blamed it on the patient. They didn't blame it on themselves.
You know, B, we're beginning to hear from some of our people that they feel that it was a, what was the term we heard the other day? A shift in the liability.
Yes, yes, yes.
That was
Yes.
an interesting, that was one of our people that came forward and said that. That was a very interesting perspective.
Yes, we're very fortunate. We've been talking to a lot of people who are signing up for the Smith DNA test and asking some questions, and that was one of the comments that came out from talking to them, and that's very interesting. Very interesting. There's a whole different perspective than the pharmaceutical company has on this. To them, it's, it's nothing, I mean, let's think about it. They come up with the opioids, they put them on the market, they flood the market with them, they get all these people have to have them or they're going to get sick. And then after they've made billions of dollars, they come up with a drug that you can take that will keep you from having the side effects as long as you take the drug. And then they're making billions of dollars from that. Something's wrong with that. Something's very wrong with that.
Well, what was wrong with that, B, is that they pushed out a product without doing a thorough evaluation on the product. And they pushed out a product in spite of the science that was already in existence. And that's one of the things that we will be talking about, particularly when we go back and talk about OxyContin and the approval of OxyContin. Let's take a good hard look at the science that was available back in 1995. And as you will see on future broadcasts, it's inconceivable how that product could have been approved by the FDA if the science itself had been looked at. And that raises the question, did the FDA fully evaluate all the science that was available, which raises the further question, did Purdue Pharma in their quest to get OxyContin approved, did they present all the proper data or did they withhold some?
That's going to be very interesting to look at and to think about and contemplate. And I know that once we go into this to the class action lawsuit, all that information that has been gained will be brought forward and it will be uncovered of what has happened. They've gone ahead and paid states money to kind of hush up money, let's say, that they could spend on so-called taking care of the people who have an opioid problem. However, it's not going there. And I see that Chrissy is trying to get on here to probably close us out for the day. But I appreciate you coming, Dr. Smith, and sharing all that information. And there she is.
Thank you for coming in, Dr. Smith. If anybody has any further questions, or certainly if they want to sign up for the Smith DNA test, they can call Dr. B directly at 704-989-1167. So thanks for joining in, and please join us every Monday through Thursday at 12:30. Thank you.
Thank you.